Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, along with our house DJ Tolliver. And Tolliver, first off, we are now the first place audience engagement show. Thank you to the Public Media Journalists Association for that award.
What? So you never tell me anything. I didn't know we won an award. I'm wearing joggers, man. You got to let me know.
You should have been wearing a tuxedo for this one. Also, I hate to say it, but Generation Z has been screwed again because we were going to do our show about the challenges of Gen Z this hour, but now we're going to talk about Iran instead.
You know, they're distracted. They're on TikTok. They don't care. We're fine.
Right. Maybe. Okay. We'll find out next time when we do that show. We are going to do that later this summer. But as you know, in the past week or so, the U.S. entered a war between Israel and Iran with airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran struck back with a strike on an American military base in Qatar, although no one was injured. And then President Trump announced a ceasefire, and since then has been defending the strikes after a leaked U.S. intelligence assessment found they may not have set back Iran's nuclear program by all that much. With all that said, we want to know this hour how you feel about the U.S. getting involved in a war with Iran. Tolliver, tell people how they can get in touch.
Yeah, you can call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com. You can also comment on our live stream on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all the places.
All right. Joining me this hour, Fox News Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin. Jennifer, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Great to be back with you.
And General Phillip Breedlove is with us as well, Distinguished Professor of the Practice in Georgia Tech's Sam Nunn School of International Affairs and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe. General Breedlove, great to have you back on as well.
It's good to be back. I love this format.
Well, thank you so much. And before we get to the phones, Jennifer, the Trump administration is pretty angry about the intelligence assessment that was leaked that found the strikes didn't obliterate Iran's nuclear program, as Trump had claimed. What do we know at this point about the effectiveness of the U.S. action in Iran?
Well, let's talk about that leaked intelligence assessment. It came from the Defense Intelligence Agency. That's the main military intelligence branch, if you will, one of 17 intelligence agencies, and they would be one of the principal lead groups that would work on bomb damage assessment. What we know about this intelligence report is that it was deemed to have low confidence, but it did say something that got people's attention, that within the first 24 hours, and this intelligence was basically went till about 9 p.m. Eastern on Sunday night, so a little over 24 hours after the strikes. The initial assessment, again, with low confidence, was that they may have set back the program anywhere from a few months up to a year. That's a big range, and it's not the final word. There are going to be other intelligence agencies and also parts of the intelligence community that weigh in, and it will then be compiled through the ODNI and given to President Trump. So this is not the final word, but it certainly gives some indication. I don't think they would just say that without having any evidence. And so it does raise some questions, particularly when you look back at some of the things that Iran told the IAEA that they were going to do before the strikes, and also some of the satellite imaging of the site at Fordo that showed a lot of trucks, about a dozen trucks, 2 days before the strikes. And the question was, what were those trucks doing? Could some of them have been taking some of the near weapons grade highly enriched uranium out of that site? And did some of that highly enriched uranium survive?
Yeah. General Breedlove, what do you think, whether the strikes were as effective as Trump said, which he said they obliterated the nuclear program, or as ineffective as the worst assessment that came out, the sort of lowest assessment that came out of that intelligence assessment? What is the significance of the U.S. getting involved in the way that it did?
Well, let me just add a thought to Jennifer's excellent thoughts on this. You know, battle damage assessment is an art, not a science. There is a lot of science involved. And one of the things we learn as commanders who have not only flown these missions, but led these missions and then commanded these missions, battle damage assessment is the classic for the statement you've heard a lot. It's never as good or as bad as you first hear. And most of the time, what you get immediately after a strike is later refined, we will say that. And so, yeah, this first leaked document or leaked report was a preliminary one, and I think one of the reasons they labeled it of low confidence is because it was made so quickly. And what we're finding out day by day now is more facts that talk to these things. And so, this will continue to refine, and at some point we'll bring in some of the very highly technical things that some we can talk about on this program, others that are not, and they will look at air sampling and all manner of things to determine what went on under the ground, and we will get to a very good conclusion.
But General Breedlove, there are many presidents that have looked at the situation in Iran and considered military action. They didn't take it. Trump took it. Is there a consequence of that?
Well, the fact of the matter is, a lot of those presidents didn't have a mop. The son of mop that we've been dropping for many years, and we understand and learned how this worked, is the Bluey 109. And we dropped Bluey 109s in several of our wars, and we learned how the physics of this kind of weapon works. And so only recently have we come to the mop. And remember that this is the very first time it's used. That's another reason why we have to be very introspective when we look at what happened, because it's the first combat use of the weapon.
Jennifer, what are your sources telling you about potential retaliation on the part of Iran? Was that attack on the U.S. base in Qatar all that's going to happen, or are people expecting more?
Well, I think if you look at the history of Iran, usually they don't fight a conventional war. They know they're overmatched with the United States. And so that is why they alerted through either Oman or Qatar. They gave a sense of what the scope of what they were going to fire so that the U.S. could be ready. There were some incredible details during the press briefing at the Pentagon today in which we learned that there were just 44 young soldiers between the age of 21 and 28 who stood by two Patriot missile batteries and shot down those 14 ballistic missiles, which take less than 2 minutes to fly from Iran towards America's largest base in the Middle East. That's Al Udeid in Qatar. It is quite extraordinary. The Patriot missile performed incredibly well. Those soldiers performed incredibly well. I think General Breedlove would agree with me that if you look back at the mission itself and what was accomplished by the military, let's not talk about whether it destroyed everything or the entire nuclear program is taken offline. That we can't say at this point. But what we can say is that what the U.S. military was asked to do and the mission that they were given, it went off almost flawlessly. To have B-2 bombers take off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri and fly a round trip 37 hours, refueled along the way by 50 air refueling planes that were positioned across the Mediterranean and Middle East. And then to drop what we learned today, more details about at Fordo, they dropped 12 of those MOP bunker buster bombs that General Breedlove talked about. They're 30,000-pound bombs. They dropped the first bomb into there were two air ventilation shafts, if you will, in Fordo. And there was some debate before that as to whether they had cratered the entrances. But all along, the plan was to send those MOP bombs down the shafts. And they had to use the first mop to take the concrete that had been laid in the last few days by the Iranians over the shaft. They used that to remove that. And then 5 successive GPS positioned 30,000-pound bombs were sent down those shafts. That's why they feel pretty confident that they were able to take all those centrifuges offline down below at Fordo. That doesn't deal necessarily with the highly enriched uranium, which could have been removed.
Yeah.
But in terms of that mission, and we can't forget the Navy was involved as well.
Yeah.
You had a submarine that was 400 miles away that fired 30 Tomahawk missiles at Isfahan, another very, very important site there. And they all were done with synchronicity. And General Breedlove can talk about how hard that is since he was in the Air Force.
Right.
Go
ahead, General.
Just a superior mission. And as the chairman laid out, lots of things that he said, some of us wondered if we could say. So now we could talk about these things. But we had the combination of what we call targeteering. These guys that were developing this target had been doing it for 15 years.
Yeah.
And they watched it built and they watched how it worked. Then we had some great targeteering. The MOP, as good as it is, was not going to go straight through the mountain into the mission space. As Jennifer laid out, we had to find a different way to get blast and overpressure into the mission space. And that was by going down these shafts. And the beauty of the MOP is it is able to penetrate to a certain depth and then cook off. And
Right.
so these bombs were set to go down until they intersected with the halls that went into the mission space. And then they went off, and all of that blast and overpressure went up into the mountain, into the spaces, and did the work.
So clearly a very impressive operation, and I'm sure we're going to get to this in the calls. I just want to ask just briefly, very briefly, Jennifer Breedlove, before we take a quick break. Are you worried about the U.S. getting sucked into another conflict, though, even if it is an impressive operation?
I think, Jeremy, that the fact that the president was actually successfully able to drop those bombs, not leave too much time for, and that once they knew that the Iranian response was going to be kind of one and done, and to basically declare victory and get out,
Right.
that I think will prevent a larger conflict right now for the U.S. military.
We shall see. Tolliver, the strikes on the facilities were actually not the first time President Trump has ordered an attack on Iran.
Yeah, back in 2020, near the end of his first term, he ordered the assassination of top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, who was in Iraq at the time.
We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war. I have deep respect for the Iranian people. They are a remarkable people with an incredible heritage and unlimited potential. We do not seek regime change. However, the Iranian regime's aggression in the region, including the use of proxy fighters to destabilize its neighbors, must end, and it must end now.
He said he didn't support regime change then, kind of changed his tune in recent days, at least on social media.
Yeah.
Tolliver, some music here. What are we listening to?
This is David Bowie with Fall Dog Bombs the Moon. So in this song, Fall Dog is like a charming dog who bombs Iraq. So I can't always follow David Bowie, but I like his imagination. More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking for your thoughts on U.S. involvement in Iran. Tolliver, what is the number to call in?
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on social media. And I'll just say one more time, if you write 6 paragraphs, it's tough for me to get that on air. Okay,
so short, it's not going to be heard by others. Yeah. I'm joined by Fox News Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe General Phillip Breedlove. And the phone lines are completely full. So let's go to Dan, who's in Kansas City. Dan, your thoughts on U.S. involvement in Iran?
Good evening. I'm a long-time, 3-time Trump voter, which means in the urban liberal milieu of Kansas City, I've paid a pretty high social price among friends and family. And I really do not like these strikes at all. It's not a red line for me because I believe his domestic agenda is so important. But if we get sucked into a boots on the ground, Iraq-style regime change war, I will be right out hand in hand with my liberal friends in the streets, and I'll be done. That's not an America first foreign policy. I don't care what kind of regime Iran has. They haven't committed any act that could be construed as an act of war against us. And nukes, I mean, Pakistan's much less stable. We give them billions of dollars. They have nukes. Israel, unlike Iran, isn't a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They have a secret illegal nuclear program. They started that by stealing the enriched uranium from us. They've got the Samson option where they threaten friend and foe alike if they get in a tight spot. And we have no business over there. And I'm really worried, like, how the Netanyahu, it's like the tail wagging the dog. The Israel lobby is so powerful. It makes people confused about what America's interests really are.
Dan, I really appreciate your call. And Jennifer Griffin, we've heard already from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, a very conservative Republican member of Congress, Thomas Massey, a conservative Republican member of Congress. Both of them have articulated what Dan did there and saying that they're Republicans, they're Trump supporters, but they're not in favor of what's happening.
Well, I think every American should agree and would agree that the U.S. does not want to be involved in another forever war, if you will, in the Middle East, or find itself sucked in. And we all know how this goes. You can do something that is a perfect military operation in the first. I remember the Thunder run into Baghdad seemed pretty perfect, and then in the months that followed, you'd find yourself in the middle of a very, very complicated war involving regime change.
Mm-hmm.
I think the president was very clear. He drew a red line. He had some mixed messaging for a little while, frankly, in those initial days about regime change and toyed with it a little bit. But it was very clear. And frankly, the Israelis were frustrated that they had to stop before they were going to go on. And they knew where the supreme leader was, and they were probably going for regime change. But the president stopped that. I think right now that the real question is, what did we accomplish by using the military in the way that we just did, bombing a country that we are not at war with? And there are issues about the War Powers Act, and they should be debated in Congress, frankly. But I think right now, I think all things considered, it does seem like the president was able to carry out the strikes, stop, call for a ceasefire, and then get the American military back to a more relaxed posture. That being said, the Iranians get a final say, and they typically do things like terrorism and assassinations. They have long memories, and they've been fighting the U.S. basically since 1979.
Well, in General Breedlove, even if the nuclear program wasn't obliterated, Iran has already now lost several key military leaders. They're not getting the help that they want from Russia or China. Their proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas have been weakened. Is the regime at risk of collapse?
I wouldn't want to make the judgment about whether the regime is at risk of collapse, but I think there's some facts that we can consider about the status of the theocracy and how much it controls its future. And that is one of the things that's not discussed here is that Israel went in and established air supremacy over half of Iran and was defeating Iran's military in detail, plinking their high-value assets, taking things away from them. And I think that's a reason why Iran brought back a very, very measured response towards al-Udeid. And if you believe the reporting, they even warned us that attack was coming, et cetera, et cetera. And so internally, the theocracy is representing that as a great strike, and we did great damage. But externally, I think they were actually messaging us that they're ready to stop the big kinetics, because let's just say it one more time. When another nation owns the airspace over your country, you are in a very, very bad way. And I think the theocracy understood that and was trying to get out of this problem before they lost all their military capability.
Let's go to Brian, who's in Tampa, Florida. Brian, welcome to the middle. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Well, I generally not a Trump supporter. I vote against him every time I can, but he's got a point a few times. I think he's right on this attack.
Why is that?
I think we need to confront our adversaries. I hope that Ukraine wins in their war, or I'd like to see him get more aggressive towards Russia and our adversaries. I almost believe at this point that we might have been better taking Patton's advice, wipe them out while we can.
Are you worried at all, Brian, about unintended consequences, about the U.S. getting sucked into a war, having to send troops into Iran? Oh, maybe Brian, maybe, there he is.
I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Well, I'd rather not, but I'm fine with spending planes.
Yeah,
Uh,
sending planes. Okay, Jennifer Griffin. As you hear that is that's one view. Supportive, wants to confront America's adversaries.
Well, I think what's interesting to hear is that there is a feeling of of support even among well, many Americans would like to see the president be tougher with Russia in Ukraine. So this was a kind of a re-leveling, if you will, and because it ended so quickly, and if it is done for now, which it does sort of feel that way, if you know, at the Pentagon and elsewhere. Is that it did send a really strong deterrent message to China in particular as they look toward Taiwan, because really the American military performed incredibly well and showed that they could kind of reach out and touch their adversaries very far around the world without them even seeing them coming with stealth technology. Now, that would be a different situation with China, but I still think that President Xi was watching the U.S. military, and it would perhaps give him pause in terms of using his own military anytime soon. I wish the president, like your caller said, would get tougher with Putin over Ukraine, because Ukraine, like Israel, is an ally of the United States. Ukraine has, I mean, one of the reasons the Patriot missiles worked so well is that they have been used in Ukraine, and the data that they've been able to glean and use, they've improved the software so much that they're incredibly accurate thanks to the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainian model is using a proxy ally like Ukraine to fend off an adversary, and U.S. troops not getting involved. So I think nobody has the stomach for U.S. troops getting involved anywhere per se, but using military might properly to send a message and to say you've crossed a line, it does tend to have a deterrent effect.
Yeah, it's interesting how all of these things are connected. Tolliver, what's coming in online?
Yeah, Robert from Boise says, I'm curious about the status of the enriched uranium the Iranians had already. Where is it? If it didn't get moved prior to the strikes, can it be recovered? If it is recovered, can it be used in other smaller attacks not needing nuclear missiles? What about a dirty backpack style of weapon? Then Amy in Rochester, Minnesota, been there, says, my husband escaped from Iran. We, like many or most Iranians within and outside of Iran, long for the end of this regime. This attack was not only from the air, but also from the ground. Moreover, the banks were also successfully targeted. My husband is very hopeful. What was accomplished in Iran was and is encouragement to the vast majority of Iranians and discouragement to the fanatics in Iran.
General Breedlove, on that first point, what about the enriched uranium? I mean, the reason that we care about this is because Iran could have a nuclear weapon that may affect the United States or other allies. Do we know where the enriched uranium is at this point?
So I don't think that it has been revealed, or maybe we don't know, but here's something that I think people are just flat overlooking. We were in a state of what we call in the military persistent stare at this target. We were using all manner of technical ability to watch what was going on around this target. And the trucks are being presented as a mystery. I don't think there's any mystery of those trucks. We will eventually find out. Something will be revealed. I don't think we've been given all the data and knowledge we know about those trucks, but I will bet you that we watched them from the minute they pulled up to the minute they left with various methods, and we will eventually know more about what happened there.
Yeah.
So I don't share the concern of the mystery. I think will eventually be allowed to understand what we know about those trucks.
Let's go to Sharon.
General
Yeah, go ahead.
Breedlove, don't you agree that once we find out where that highly enriched uranium, it's 60% enriched and it's 900 pounds worth, enough for 9 or 10 bombs, it's not weapons grade yet, but it's a short centrifuge cycle away, that it will still take negotiations, and it will take inspectors, and it will take the IAEA being allowed back in, and leaving it as is. You can't strike at something like this and then just leave it. You do have to stay engaged with Iran, and I'm not sure that I have a strong sense that the president wants to remain engaged with this problem.
Well, I think it was Clausewitz that said, war is politics by other means. So we have both more possibly quote unquote war in front of us, and we certainly have more politics in front of us.
Yeah.
And you're right. We're going to have to figure out where this stuff is. Lots of voices now saying it's still in the hole. Lots of voices questioning that, and I think that'll play out over time.
Yeah. Sharon is calling from Erie, Colorado. Sharon, what are your thoughts about U.S. involvement in Iran?
Well, aside from our fascination and our budget with our ability, with our weapons and our brilliant ability to drop bombs, I remember Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction and the lies that were told to the American people to go over and basically destroy Iraq. I believe the U.S. and Israel are committing war crimes. Why we've been watching a live stream genocide for the last 2 years, since Israel bombed Iran, they have continued to increase the slaughter of starving Palestinian people, all while we're all looking at Iran and talking about our brilliant military moves. The U.S. had no business bombing in Iran. We were not at war with them, and our own intelligence told us that there was no threat. Iran was in compliance, and it makes us look like Israel's lapdog. Israel has been proven to repeatedly lie. Every accusation they've made has turned out to be a confession, and now we're bombing Iran on their behalf. And, you know, who's going to do this?
Yeah.
One more thing. Where's the red line for Israel? Where's the red line for Israel?
Sharon, thank you for that call. General Breedlove, let me pick up on the point that Sharon just made about the U.S. being Israel's lapdog. Some people are looking at this and saying Israel was the one who started this. They put the Trump administration in a position where they really didn't have a choice and had to do what they did. Do you think that Netanyahu is the one sort of leading and Trump is following, or the other way around right now?
I'm not going to answer that. I'm going to go back a little further in this history and just restart the conversation. Israel has never said we are about eliminating Iran and everything about Iran and eliminating them as a country. Iran has said over and over and over that their goal is to eliminate Israel, and they have developed weapons programs to enable them to do that. So I think while I understand the passion of the caller, there are many things that were said that I don't agree with. And the impetus for Israel responding, if you go really back to the beginning of what Iran is trying to do to Israel, you might see it in a different light.
General Breedlove, I would just add also that if you look at the bombing that the U.S. carried out, which lasted a couple of hours and involved 35 munitions, we have not heard any casualty toll from that. It's not like they were carpet bombing cities or these were isolated targets in mountains. And I can't say that nobody was killed, but it is not like what we have seen in Gaza, and that is a very different problem set than what we're talking about here.
You're exactly right, and I think that separating from the conversation of Gaza, if you look at the bombing that Iran was doing into Israel, almost every aim point was a civilian aim point. Now, I don't know that the accuracy of the Iranian missiles are good enough to really say they were aiming at the things they were hitting. But the fact of the matter is all of their strikes went almost completely into civilian areas. And as you pointed out, Jennifer, the strikes that went back into Iran were absolutely 100% focused on nuclear facilities and not civilians.
But Jennifer, we did hear, just briefly, we did hear the other day a lot of frustration from President Trump. He used the F word to talk about Israel and Iran not knowing what they're doing.
Well, absolutely. And I think you felt that frustration from the president. But I also, I lived in Israel for 7 years covering the Second Intifada. And so I'm very, very familiar and still have a lot of great sources inside Israel. And they were frustrated too with the White House. They don't want to say it now. And of course, everybody's papering over those differences. But I would say that relations might be a little bit strained right now. That's why Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister, is making his way to the White House, I think, next week. And he wants to make nice right now with the president because he knows that Israel needs the United States. I think it was interesting watching President Trump actually wield a power that most American presidents have not been willing to or able to over Israel. So on the one hand, he might have gotten pushed into a more accelerated timeline to getting involved and taking military action against Iran's nuclear program because of Bibi Netanyahu, because of the Israeli strikes. On the other hand, it was him who told them to stop, and they had to.
Well, Tolliver, as we've heard, the U.S. relationship with Iran has been in a bad place for decades. The Obama administration tried diplomacy.
Yeah, that very famous nuclear deal that Trump pulled out of, even though I thought he liked deals. Here's President Obama announcing it back in 2015.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon. This deal demonstrates that American diplomacy can bring about real and meaningful change. Change that makes our country and the world safer and more secure.
Well, a lot has happened in 10 years. We'll be right back with more of your calls coming up on The Middle. This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and this hour we're asking you for your thoughts on U.S. involvement in Iran. You can call us at 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353, or you can reach out and listen to themiddle.com. I always feel bad when I give the phone number and all the lines are full, but you can leave a message. Maybe we'll listen to it
Message
next
me.
week.
Okay, DM me.
I'm joined by former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Phillip Breedlove, and Fox News Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin. And let's go back to the phones. And Dino is in Wausau, Wisconsin. Hi, Dino. Your thoughts on U.S. involvement in Iran?
Yes, thank you so much for taking my call. I wanted to state General Breedlove restated an excellent point that the airspace in Tehran was wide open. I mean, because Israel did clear it out, so it made the mission for the American planes to go in there and complete the mission. But what really took me back was when the National Security press conference with Pete Hegseth, how angry he was. He was so angry that he was saying that people were questioning the mission that was accomplished. That it did a job. It did a job. Did they just did they blow up the mountain, or did they actually get to where they? What was? I know we don't understand. We don't know yet what the result was about. Yes. But it just created doubt in my mind a lot that Pete Hegseth was so angry that people didn't agree with the mission that it kind of it created doubt. And,
I'm glad you brought that up, Dino. I'm glad you brought that up, Dino, because it is the elephant in the room this hour, because we've got Jennifer Griffin, and Pete Hegseth went after Jennifer Griffin, who's a longtime reporter there at the Pentagon, and Jennifer Griffin went right back and stood for herself, and she's been praised across the media, rightfully so, for being an excellent journalist. But Jennifer, what do you think about just the anger that was clear and obvious by Pete Hegseth and other members of the administration that people are not celebrating what happened as much as they would like?
Well, I think the anger and the emotion, I mean, he was very emotional at the press briefing, really comes from the fact that he doesn't like to be questioned. And he wants people to just take it. This leaked report started to get in the way of a nice, neat, and tidy narrative. And as we know, with military operations and with intelligence and with the Middle East, it's never neat and tidy. And it is our job as reporters to ask questions. And we were asking questions that, frankly, Americans were asking. And he didn't want to answer those questions. And he instead goes on offense against the press and blames the press and says that, we're not patriotic and this, that, and the other. And I just find it very rich and a bit ironic, given the fact that that one of the reasons he's defense secretary is a feeling that the American people were lied in the lead up to the Iraq war. And he, who served over there honorably, he and the other fellow veterans have a lot of questions about the Iraq War and wanted the press to do a much better job of questioning the Defense Department, the State Department, the intelligence community in the lead up to that war. So I find it a bit rich and a bit ironic that he doesn't want any questions and just wants the press and the American people to take their word for it. That's not how it works in America. That's not how it works under the First Amendment. And that's why reporters were pressing him today, and he got very upset.
Well, in general, what do you think? I mean, doesn't the tone of the administration when dealing with any war or any military action matter in terms of public support and public perception of what's going on?
So, Jeremy, I've spent 39 years remaining apolitical, and I'm not going to answer that question because it's decidedly a political question. Let me, however, point out that the chairman went on to, I think, hit a 500-foot home run with his presentation. I'm not denigrating what or even commenting on what the secretary did, but the chairman nailed it. And he opened up by wrapping himself in the flag a little bit, but that was because he was really proud of the brave work of all the people out there. But then he went on to, I think, get to some first principle facts about the targeteering, weaponeering, execution, and expectations. And now we will develop the proof or the proof of the pudding of the expectation. So I think he really nailed it.
General Breedlove, the one thing I would add to that, and it is a point of criticism, is that General Kane said at one point that we don't do battle damage assessment, BDA. And that's just simply not true. The intelligence agencies, there are three that fall under the Pentagon: the NSA, the National Geospatial Agency, and the DIA. And they absolutely report to the chairman. So to wash his hands of any questions of the battle damage assessment, I thought was disingenuous, and I think was not actually truthful. And because he may not want to reveal the battle damage assessment at this point, it may be preliminary, and he's been saying from the get-go it would take days, if not weeks, to know more. But therefore, then a lot of the press were asking, well, how is it that the political leadership is saying that this is a completely destroyed the program? It's obliterated was the term they used, which is not a term that intelligence officers would use. And then to say, wipe your hands of it and say, well, we don't do BDA, that's for the intelligence community. That's not totally accurate.
Yeah, I think, Jennifer, as I listened to that, there are a lot of people that sort of had a stop and think moment when he said that. I think his context was operators don't do intel people do intel. But you're right, there are multiple military intel people. And having run an AOC and been a JFAC, it is something that the operators help gather and set the stage for the analysis that intel people do. But as you correctly state, many of those intel people actually live and breathe in the joint and the DoD environment. So
they love their acronyms in the military. I've heard more in the last few minutes. And also, Jennifer, I have to say, I had never heard of the National Geospatial Agency. Is that what is that? That's one of them.
One of the most interesting and secretive and most extraordinary intelligence assets that we have. They are the ones who do all the satellite imagery and reading, and they could do a lot of special stuff, and they're pretty impressive.
Well, they've never had a TV show about them, so that we're waiting for that. That's a
good thing. That's a very good thing.
You want them very quiet, but they are the best.
Hubert is calling from Boston. Hubert, what do you think about U.S. involvement in Iran?
I don't think we should do it. The reason why, because we already had an agreement on paper that he threw out. Now that the president threw out, now he wants to put us back to where we were already at. We also got to realize that our president is setting this country into a form of government that is authoritarian, and he's following these authoritarians, and we have to be careful who we're following. I mean, not to degrade Israel, but Israel knocked off a super weapon. They killed an American scientist who was helping the Kuwait and who was helping the Iraqs build a super weapon way back. Now Iran gets a bomb, or is supposed to be getting a bomb. Now with our help, we're supposed to knock that out.
Well,
now where we gonna go next? Saudi Arabia, then Jordan, then Kuwait. I mean, all these countries have money and they can do the same thing, launch a nuclear program. I mean, where is it going to stop?
Yeah.
I mean, and plus, we're following authoritarianism.
Yeah.
Israel is under an authoritarian regime.
Okay,
They have a military. They have a military.
We've got it. Let me get a response to what you've just said from yeah, right. There's a lot there. But what about the very first part of that, Jennifer, the nuclear deal that we heard Obama talking about that was signed 10 years ago? Trump pulled out of that deal, but now he wants to have a conversation next week, potentially with with Iranian leaders. Do you expect that any deal that they reach is going to be pretty similar to the one that already existed before?
Well, let me back up on one point. Israel is a democracy. It's not an authoritarian.
Yes. Right.
And so, but the caller's concerns about authoritarianism and authoritarian leaders around the world is valid, but not in terms of Israel. In terms of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal that President Obama signed that was negotiated for 2 years, one of the criticisms of that deal was that it did not deal with the ballistic missile program that Iran, which we've now seen in the last year, the extent to which they were building ballistic missiles to threaten not just Israel, but also the Middle East. And what I would say is one of the problems and one of the reasons I think we got to a military moment where the president decided to use the military is he was extremely frustrated after 60 days of being sort of run around by the Iranians. They're very good negotiators and they're good at giving the runaround. He didn't feel like he was getting any deal that was any better than the JCPOA, which he had ripped up. And it may have been even worse. So now I think it's hopeful that at least I would be very concerned if they weren't going back to negotiations next week. I just don't know how serious the Iranians are about it. And I don't know how much bandwidth the president has to pursue negotiations at this point.
So there's a lot of other things going on right now. Yeah.
If I could add on that, and some of my very best friends were a part of developing I call it the JICPOA. And although they are esteemed colleagues of mine, we can disagree. And I would add to Jennifer's point about what the president was not happy about, and many of us were not happy about, is the inspection regime under the JICPOA was in many minds questionable. I used 3 words earlier in this show, and I'll use them again. What if we have a new agreement with Iran? We need pervasive, persistent, intrusive inspections, because Iran was able to keep an awful lot of what they were doing, and they just wanted us to trust them in that old agreement. And so some of my very most esteemed colleagues and I don't agree on this, but I believe that any new agreement has to address the concerns of inspections. And I don't think the Iranians are going to sign up to that. This is going to be a hard thing to move forward on, because they want to, even if they don't have a program now and it has been destroyed, they want to keep the world worried about it, concerned about it, and confused about the facts. They need that to keep their regime intact.
Let me go to Dennis, who's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hi, Dennis. Your thoughts on U.S. involvement in Iran?
Yeah, well, first of all, I must say, being in the middle here in Wisconsin, I really appreciate your show. I'm about as against Trump as possible, but I have been so disturbed by what the Iranians have done and so on. And given that it would take maybe somebody as chaotic, the kind of the chaos that Trump can pull something like this off, because what the Democrats had been doing in approaching other areas, it just seemed like when you had bullies around, there was nothing from that Democratic approach that was going to put a little fear in them. And so that's the one way I can support Trump.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Dennis, for that. Jennifer, I was speaking with somebody the other day who is not a Trump supporter, but said, the same thing. Maybe the chaos is actually useful in this case.
Well, it's interesting. It's not just in the Middle East. He just came back from NATO and he got, I think, nearly all except Spain to agree. And I think General Breedlove will be able to expand on this, but to spend 5% of their GDP on defense. Now, they're still a long ways from doing that, the NATO allies. But the fact of the matter is nobody but Trump has been able to get the NATO allies to increase their spending. Now, Vladimir Putin has. Arguably, they wouldn't be doing it if they hadn't invaded Ukraine. But President Trump's been very effective of getting the Europeans to sort of wake up to the danger on their doorstep and start and pushing them to invest more in their defense. And that is significant. And that is because of his chaotic way, as the caller described it, of negotiating and sort of being very unpredictable.
The NATO allies were supposed to be spending 2% on defense of their GDP, and he finally got many of them to do that, almost all of them, maybe all of them to do that, and now he's saying 5% is the new number. Jennifer Breedlove.
Yeah, so actually the numbers are that he got going into this, about 28 of the nations, 32 were hitting the 2%, but not all 32 were. Spain was going to be a holdout, Jennifer, but they signed it. So
Good.
Spain came on board. I think there was some negotiating that was done behind closed doors. There's rumors out there in the press about what the president used to get to them there, but Spain is there. But may I just say that yes, for all the quote unquote mean tweets and things in the first administration, and for all of the tough love in this administration, whether you like his techniques or not, we have to agree with what Jennifer said. This is the first president in the history of NATO to get NATO to improve their spending. I'm not getting political here and supporting anybody, but it is a fact he's the only president that got NATO to increase its spending.
Let me just finally come back as we close out this hour to this question about U.S. involvement. And Jennifer, if because of any of these actions from the U.S., from Israel, or from an uprising in Iran, the regime falls, are there conversations taking place about what the U.S. responsibility would be at that point in terms of building a new Iran, getting in with whoever's going to take power there?
I think the model that you should look to is the way the president decided to start relations again with the Syrian leader that after Bashar Assad fell in Syria quite suddenly and fled to Russia, and you had this new leader, al-Shara, who had really been on the U.S. terror list. He may still be on the list, but he had an al-Qaeda-ish background. And the president decided, hey, if Syria is going to have a shot at, we'll engage them. We're not going to go and do nation building, and we're not going to have our military on the ground there. But I think if the Iranian people rose up and a better leader came forward than the current theocracy there, I think you would need very nimble diplomacy. But the U.S., I think the president has really sent a lot of messages to the Iranian people that he wants them to have a big, beautiful economy and start trading with the United States. But right now, unfortunately, and this is Israel's argument, they stopped short of regime change, which obviously every American that sends shudders through their spines after the experience in Iraq. But I think that we don't know how this plays out, but I cannot see the American military being involved there. But I could see trade relations and promises of support diplomatically.
Great note to end on. I want to thank my guests so much. Fox News Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin and General Phillip Breedlove, former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe for NATO. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
And don't forget The Middle is available as a podcast in partnership with iHeart Podcasts on the iHeart app or wherever you listen to podcasts, where you can also listen to our weekly podcast extra, One Thing Trump Did.
As always, you can call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out to us at listentothemiddle.com, where you can also sign up for our free weekly newsletter and support us with a tax-deductible contribution.
The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, and produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmistaz, John Barth, Annika Deschler, and Brandon Kondritz. Our technical director is Steve Mork. Thanks to our satellite radio listeners, our podcast audience, and the hundreds of public radio stations that are making it possible for people across the country to listen to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I will talk to you next week.